never lost control. Chuck Norris didn't shout, didn't boast, and never fought battles that weren't worth his time. For decades, he carried himself with quiet strength, a warrior who believed that real power was found in restraint. But something changed. After years of silence, the man who built a career on discipline finally spoke out. And when he did, it wasn't about fame or politics. It was about betrayal, the legend who stayed silent. Chuck Norris was never the kind of man to chase controversy. From the start, his life was about control and discipline. Born on March 10, 1940, in Ryan, Oklahoma, he grew up shy, poor, and uncertain. His father, Ray, was a World War II veteran whose drinking often turned home life into chaos. His mother, Wilma, raised 3 sons alone after the divorce, moving from Kansas to California in search of stability. Chuck later admitted he had no confidence, not in school, not in sports, not even in himself. Everything changed in 1958 when he joined the U.S. Air Force and was stationed in South Korea. There he discovered Tang Soo Do, a martial art that taught him not only how to fight, but how to control his mind. When he returned home, he devoted himself to it completely, opening karate schools and teaching the discipline that would define his life. Among his students were Steve McQueen and Bob Barker, men who admired not just his skill, but his quiet strength. By the late 1960s, Chuck was winning championships across America. His calm precision made him unstoppable. Then Bruce Lee invited him to star in Way of the Dragon, and everything changed. The film was a global hit, and the quiet martial artist from Oklahoma became an international icon. But fame never corrupted him. Unlike many stars of his era, Chuck refused to let ego take over. His code was simple: respect is earned, never demanded. While others partied, he taught classes. While others chased headlines, he stayed home with family. That humility became his trademark and his armor. Still, Hollywood was changing. Discipline gave way to arrogance, and honor was slowly replaced by mockery. The new generation didn't live by the same code. For a man who believed in respect above all else, that was painful to watch. For years, Chuck kept his silence, even when younger actors mocked or challenged him. But one day, he broke it. When he finally named the 4 men who had crossed the line, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Steven Seagal, Jim Carrey, and Bruce Lee, it wasn't anger that spoke. It was disappointment. "I don't fight for entertainment," he said once. A simple sentence, but one that explained everything. After a lifetime of discipline, even silence has its limit. Jean-Claude Van Damme. The challenge that ended a friendship. Long before Jean-Claude Van Damme became the muscles from Brussels, he was just another hungry dreamer in Los Angeles, trying to break into the business. It was the early 1980s, a time when karate schools were opening on every corner, and martial arts movies were the new gold rush. Van Damme was young, charming, and desperate to prove himself. He drove taxis, waited tables, and even worked as a bouncer at a popular spot in Redondo Beach called Woody's Wharf, a bar owned by none other than Chuck Norris. At first, their relationship was cordial. Chuck saw potential in the young Belgian, polite, eager, and willing to learn. Van Damme admired him, too. To him, Norris wasn't just a star. He was a legend, the living bridge between true martial arts and Hollywood success. But admiration has a way of turning into rivalry, especially when fame is the prize. As Van Damme's career began to rise with films like Bloodsport and Kickboxer, whispers of competition started to spread. Chuck was already established as America's martial arts hero, while Van Damme represented the flashy new generation, younger, bolder, more willing to show off for the cameras. Their styles couldn't have been more different. Norris valued precision and discipline. Van Damme valued flair and spectacle. Then came the night that ended everything. According to several insiders during a private party in Hollywood in the early 1990s, Van Damme approached Chuck in front of a small crowd and jokingly challenged him to a real fight. It was meant as bravado, the kind of thing young stars do to impress a room, but it landed like a slap. Chuck smiled politely and declined, saying softly, "I don't fight for entertainment." The crowd laughed. Van Damme laughed too, but Norris didn't. That night changed their relationship forever. From then on, Chuck kept his distance. When rumors surfaced about a possible collaboration between the two in the mid-1990s, it quietly fell apart. Chuck didn't want to share the screen with someone who had disrespected him, even if the insult had been born from arrogance rather than malice. In 2001, at a martial arts exhibition in Texas, Norris was asked about Van Damme. He didn't raise his voice, didn't insult him, didn't dramatize the past. He simply said, "He's talented, but undisciplined." For Chuck Norris, that was the harshest criticism imaginable. In his world, discipline was sacred, the line between mastery and mediocrity. Steven Seagal, disrespect and the martial arts divide. If Jean-Claude Van Damme's offense was arrogance, Steven Seagal's was pride, a sharper, colder kind. Their feud wasn't born from a single moment, but from years of quiet contempt. By the late 1980s, Steven Seagal had exploded onto the Hollywood scene with his debut Above the Law, 1988, followed by a string of hits that made him one of the most recognizable faces in action cinema. His slick Aikido moves and calm, deadly presence on screen earned him fame fast, but behind the cameras, his reputation was already turning sour. In interviews, Seagal often dismissed other martial artists, calling them movie fighters who couldn't handle a real fight. He spoke about Bruce Lee as if he were overrated and labeled American martial artists, including Chuck Norris, as entertainers rather than warriors. For a man like Norris, who had lived by the code of respect his entire life, those words cut deep. Bruce Lee had been his friend, his teacher, and his brother in arms. To hear Seagal mock him was more than a professional insult. It was personal. Norris didn't respond in the press. That wasn't his way. But in the martial arts community, silence often says more than confrontation. His old friend Bob Wall, who had appeared alongside both Bruce Lee and Chuck, took action. Along with legends like Bill Superfoot Wallace and Benny the Jet Urquidez, he formed what they jokingly called the Dirty Dozen. They publicly challenged Seagal to back up his words in an actual fight. Seagal never showed up. For Chuck, that confirmed everything he needed to know. Seagal wasn't just disrespectful. He was a man who spoke without honor. From then on, Norris avoided any project, event, or interview that would associate their names. He even turned down joint appearances at martial arts conventions, quietly requesting to be scheduled on different days. Years later, when asked about Seagal's comments, Norris kept his composure, but his tone hardened. "In martial arts," he said, "respect is everything. Without it, the art means nothing." Those words weren't aimed at Seagal directly, but everyone knew who they were for. Their feud wasn't a shouting match. It was a cold war. Two men who had mastered the same language of movement, but lived by completely different philosophies. Seagal thrived on ego and spectacle, while Chuck stood for discipline and humility. Hollywood loved Seagal's unpredictability, but in the world of martial arts, Norris's restraint carried far more weight. Jim Carrey, the mockery that went too far. Not all of Chuck Norris's feuds came from fighters. Some came from places he least expected, from comedians who mistook laughter for courage. One of those moments came from Jim Carrey, a man known for his boundless energy and wild sense of humor. At the height of his fame in the 1990s, Carrey was unstoppable. Ace Ventura, The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, all massive hits that made him the king of comedy. But during one of his stage performances, Carrey decided to parody Chuck Norris. It was supposed to be funny. Wearing a fake beard and a cowboy hat, he strutted across the stage, imitating Chuck's signature stoicism. "I'm Chuck Norris," he joked. "I win fights without getting off the couch." The crowd erupted in laughter. But when Chuck heard about it, he didn't laugh. He saw something different, not humor, but mockery. To a man who had spent decades teaching respect, that kind of ridicule felt like betrayal. Unlike most actors, Chuck didn't live his life as a celebrity caricature. He valued dignity over popularity, humility over showmanship. For him, martial arts wasn't a costume or a punchline, it was sacred. And so when Carrey's skit became a viral bit on late-night shows, Chuck quietly took offense. He didn't respond publicly, didn't insult Carrey back, didn't issue threats or lawsuits. He just erased him. From that point on, Chuck refused any appearance or collaboration that involved Jim Carrey's name. When producers once suggested pairing them for a commercial, he declined without hesitation. In an interview years later, he simply said, "I'm not part of that circus." Those 6 words said everything. Jim Carrey, for his part, never apologized, and perhaps never realized the depth of what he'd done. To comedians, parody is harmless. To Chuck Norris, it was something else entirely. It was disrespect disguised as laughter. It wasn't about his ego. It was about the meaning behind what he represented. A lifetime of self-control, discipline, and service reduced to a punchline. For Chuck, that was unforgivable. It wasn't the first time Hollywood had mocked him, but it was the first time it came from someone he had once admired. Beneath his silence, there was pain. The kind that comes not from anger, but from disappointment in a culture that no longer understood respect. Bruce Lee, the friendship that died in silence. This one hurt the most. Because before Bruce Lee became a legend, before Chuck Norris was a household name, they were just 2 martial artists who respected each other more than anyone else. Their friendship began in the late 1960s, long before either man had stepped into Hollywood fame. They met through tournaments, competitors who became allies. Bruce admired Chuck's discipline and composure. Chuck admired Bruce's intensity and vision. They trained together, exchanged ideas, and often stayed up late debating martial arts philosophy. When Bruce Lee called Chuck in 1971 with an offer to appear in his next film, Way of the Dragon, Chuck didn't hesitate. The 2 men shared a dream, to bring real martial arts to the big screen, not just flashy kicks and fake punches, but the art itself. Chuck was cast as Colt, the American fighter who faces Bruce in the film's legendary Coliseum showdown. It was supposed to be a celebration of their craft, 2 masters, fighting as equals. But behind the cameras, things were far more complicated. Bruce was at the height of his fame and under immense pressure to deliver a global hit. He became demanding, perfectionist to the extreme. Every punch, every kick had to be rehearsed for hours. If Chuck's timing was off by a second, they started over. For a man like Norris, disciplined but proud, that intensity was hard to take. During filming in Rome, tensions simmered. Bruce would push harder, insisting on retakes until everything was flawless. Chuck respected the process, but quietly began to feel like a tool in someone else's vision. He later recalled asking Bruce who would win the fight in the end. Bruce smiled and said, "I win. I'm the star of the movie." Chuck laughed it off at the time, but the remark stuck with him. When Way of the Dragon premiered in 1972, the world hailed it as a masterpiece. The final fight became one of the most iconic scenes in film history, raw, brutal, poetic. But what the audience didn't see was the quiet distance that grew between the 2 men after the cameras stopped rolling. Bruce moved on to new projects, and Chuck went back to the United States to build his own film career. They never worked together again. Then, just 1 year later, Bruce Lee died suddenly at 32. The news stunned the world, and it crushed Chuck. He attended the funeral, silent, devastated. Whatever tension had existed between them now felt meaningless. In interviews years later, Chuck spoke about Bruce with admiration but also a trace of sadness. He called him a genius, but admitted that their friendship had ended long before death separated them. His ego, Chuck said once, was bigger than the arena we fought in. The code of silence and what remains. For most of his life, Chuck Norris was a man of peace in a business built on conflict. He didn't drink, didn't party, didn't brag. He trained, worked, prayed, and raised his family. But even the calmest men reach a point where silence becomes heavy. When he finally spoke about the actors who had crossed him, it wasn't an explosion. It was a confession. A release of years spent swallowing disappointment in an industry that often rewards arrogance more than integrity. Hollywood changed around him. The kind of discipline that once defined martial artists like Bruce Lee and himself was replaced by fame, gossip, and social media noise. Respect was no longer earned. It was traded for attention. And for a man like Chuck, who built his identity on loyalty, humility, and faith, that shift felt like betrayal. Each name he mentioned carried its own wound. Jean-Claude Van Damme, the student who became a showman. Steven Seagal, the fighter who disrespected the art itself. Jim Carrey, the comedian who mocked something sacred. Bruce Lee, the friend who turned into a rival. 4 men, 4 moments when respect was lost and could never be reclaimed. But Chuck never hated them. Not in the way Hollywood imagines hatred, loud, public, vindictive. His version of hate was quieter, colder, more permanent. He simply erased them from his world. No insults, no reconciliations, just distance. It's a form of punishment that hurts more than anger ever could. Because when a man like Chuck Norris turns his back on you, it means you've lost something far deeper than friendship. You've lost his respect. And yet, there's tragedy in that silence. For all his strength, Chuck is still human. A man who has outlived most of his rivals and friends, who carries memories heavier than trophies. Behind every story of discipline and restraint lies the loneliness of someone who demanded more from the world than the world was willing to give. Today, Chuck Norris is 85 years old. He lives quietly in Texas with his wife Gina and their twins, far from the noise of Hollywood. His net worth, built through decades of films, books, and endorsements, exceeds $70 million. But the wealth that matters most to him is peace, something he fought harder for than any championship title. He once said, "I don't hold grudges." I just remember that's Chuck Norris's truth, and perhaps his curse. He doesn't seek revenge, but he never forgets who showed him disrespect. His silence, his loyalty, his distance, they're all part of the same unbreakable code he's lived by since the Air Force, since South Korea, since the day he first tied a black belt around his waist. 4 names, 4 lessons about pride, loyalty, and silence. Chuck Norris taught us that strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when to walk away. Who would you never forgive if they disrespected you? Tell us in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more untold Hollywood stories.